everyone, and welcome back to the Mystery Theory podcast. This week is going to be a special one, and I am going to cover something that I've been reading about for quite some time now, and that is the behind the scenes, the forensic side, the study of criminal minds and how it actually started, how some things that just didn't make sense, and some of the things that didn't make sense back then, they're still used today. And we'll talk about that. Now, this week is going to be a special because I will have a new podcast every day, and we will cover different parts of this behind the criminal minds investigation. So, I hope that you join me this week. If you're new here and you like this kind of content, and then please make sure to subscribe to the podcast. And if you have a few minutes, please make sure you leave a rating afterwards so we can show up a little bit more ahead in the search for the podcast. So, before I start with today's part of this series, I want to say that for me, this is something that it's very interesting. I not only like to research true crime cases and try to not only share but kind of get an idea of what we can do better in the future. Not because the people that were in that situation could have done anything different, but because we can always learn from what happened in the past. It's like history. If we ignore it, we're not going to learn anything from it. So this kind of investigation behind the scenes, behind the criminal minds and the studies of criminal minds, the investigations, the forensic evidence, and a lot of going back to basics and understand that it's a human mind. It's very interesting to me, and I always mention that in my YouTube channel, that it's one of those things that it really is what it grabs me into a story. Try to put myself in different shoes, the victim's shoes, the ones, from the perpetrator. And even though I can never understand what they were thinking about when they decided to do something crazy like that, or any kind of crime whatsoever. I mean, I don't get it, but I hope that one day with science, we can understand what goes in their minds. What is it? Something that it's triggered, and they get a rush. Maybe they get something in some kind of chemical response or something that not every human being has. I mean, those are the questions that I have in my head. So this is a very interesting series that I thought that maybe some of you would enjoy as well. If you're part of my Patreon page, I will have this same series there only for Patreons, so make sure you check that out. That is more ASMR related. Now, we'll have to agree that technology in the forensic science field has advanced tremendously. We have fingerprints, we have ballistics, we have surveillance videos, and a lot of the new ways to analyze that forensic evidence that you could always get from a crime scene, but not always we had the tools to study and kind of find whoever did it, right? So we can agree that we still have all these things that every day we can. I mean, I shared a case in my YouTube channel recently where we talk about how they could find out where the victim was killed because they call this expert that actually brushed off the soil that the victim had in her clothing, and then because of that they found that it was probably a mechanic place or somewhere where they had to work with machinery, and how that led to solving the case. I mean, it's amazing how much we have today, but I feel like gathering evidence and finding patterns, those are still one of the biggest parts in any kind of investigation today. And I think that it was as important maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago, but it's just one of those things that is there to stay because it's one of the I don't know, most telling kind of thing that you can have to try to profile somebody or to find a suspect, in my opinion. We all know that criminologists continue to, criminologists, I should say, they try to predict the criminal potential of someone based on how they look and their physical appearance, and they even had a certain description that would fit what they thought was a criminal mind. So even back then in the 19th century, I mean, if you look a certain way, you could look like a criminal to them. Nowadays, in modern day, I should say, DNA testing suggests that genetics might play a role in the criminal mind, but other people believe that it has to do more with the environment that you live in, or maybe a combination of both that is going to determine if the person is actually going to become a criminal or not. Remember, when we're born, we're babies. I mean, who is going to be able to tell that a baby will become, the Golden Gate Killer, whatever serial killer that you are most afraid of? Think about it. When you look at a baby, you can't really put in one together and say, oh, maybe he'll become this or he'll become that. But they've done some brain scans nowadays they've done that, and some of them suggest that somebody is more likely to commit a crime based on the level of aggression and impulsivity. But this is, in my opinion, also based on the interpretation of a human being looking at the brain scan, because it is 100% scientific, the thing that, it's a brain scan, but you have to remember that the brain scan, it doesn't have a brain. It will tell you what's going on inside, but it will be up to your interpretation as a doctor what those results mean. Now, in this series, I want to share with you the findings of different investigations into criminal minds. Are they different from, yours and mine? Can we prevent them from happening in the future? Are we trying to prevent them in the future? Are we trying to find out how they work so we can prevent them? What will we do in the future? I mean, what if we can find that there is a specific mind, I'm gonna call it like a drawing. Like you look at this brain scan and you can tell, oh, this is a criminal. This is not a criminal. What are we gonna do with that information? Is that even possible? Today there are criminal minds as they were 100 years ago. But can we predict that? Can we predict that they will become or that they are criminal minds? Well, we will go through some of their findings, from back then, and hopefully that will help us understand what we're looking for today and what we're trying to make sense out of something that, of course, any kind of crime, it doesn't really make sense for most people. But that's, we're going to try to go behind the behavior and trying to find a why or who this fit to. So today we're going to talk about the theory of bad to the bone. Have you ever heard of that, saying? And I read a magazine. It was more like a book because it was very, very thick. That was talking about the father of criminology, Cesare Lombroso. He was the guy that believed that criminal minds shared physical things, like you'd have certain things that will, let the other people know that you're a criminal, like your jaw, your nose, your eyes. So let's explore today his theory and what came out of this theory. The phrase, actually, bad to the bone, was first used by this doctor, Cesare Lombroso, who was a doctor in the 19th century. Remember, we're going to start from the very beginning. And he spent most of his career dissecting the bodies of criminals. And not only criminals, but also people with mental health issues. And he just was very invested into those findings. And then he also added some of people that were, I don't know, they were called quote unquote normal, people that were not criminals, but they didn't have mental issues. And so go figure. But basically, he had those three different categories that he would use to come up with this investigation. So, according to him, after years and years of going through the corpses and the three different categories, he realized that the criminal minds share a physical characteristics is not just one. And because of that, they also share that criminal behavior background. So, it meant that if you look this way, you were more than likely were a criminal. And according to this guy, I mean, he thought that he was 100% right. And if you didn't, I mean, you were just basically a normal person, quote unquote normal person, or maybe you had some kind of mental health issues, but not a criminal mind. So according to his theory, you could tell if a person in front of you was a criminal because, number one, the shape of his jaw. There was a specific shape that you can look at it, and it's a very, you can't miss it. But apparently, a lot of the criminals back then share this kind of jaw because it's crazy how he could find different criminals with the same kind of shape. Now, number two is the shape of the forehead. And number three is the shape of their lips. So according to him, they're not only born bad, but they look like they're bad. So he found these things and he was like, well, okay, the people that have this three different things and that fit into those categories, they're really, they're bad people and they look like they are bad people. And he wanted people to know about it because he was convinced that was the truth. So in Europe and even in the United States, they were aware of this story. Today, of course, doesn't make sense. But back then, I mean, this spread a lot of panic in people because think about it. What if today there was a story in the news that said that people with, thick lips are, let's say shopaholics. Wouldn't you be a little bit interested to know, okay, how thick do they have to look like? I mean, how thick do my lips have to be? Or I mean, everybody would be using a ruler or something to measure the things and try to see if they would fit into that category. So I understand that even though he was a doctor and he believed, he truly believed that what he was saying was the truth and that he basically, he revealed this to everyone and this was something that nobody talked about before. So it was breaking news. Think about the panic of people. And I just gave you a silly example, but let's say that in the news it says that people with hazel eyes are prone to criminal activities. People with hazel eyes, it's not one of the most common color in eyes, but still think about how you would feel if you have that and you had never thought about committing any kind of crime. This was kind of crazy and it was spreading all over. And he was basing everything in his theory in science because he was using this anthropometry or anthropometry thing, which is the measurements of anatomical characteristics. So skull dimensions and that kind of thing. So he was basing his findings in something 100% based in science. And he was doing all this after people, died. It wasn't like he was just grabbing random people from the streets and measuring their nose and kind of putting a shape to their jaws and, that kind of thing. And so this theory, even though it sounds a little bit crazy, think about this spreading around the world, people freaking out about this, and this doctor having the insurance, let's say that way, that everything is based in science. I mean, he described the physical characteristic of a criminal, and he even said that some of those characteristics would make you look like or you would resemble of what it was considered a pre-human or even an ape, those were the characteristics. And there is no explanation why he said that, because honestly, I mean, this guy was very out there, which most of the time it's a great thing. And I'm going to tell you, great things came out of this theory that we use today. But just think about it. I mean, he was interpreting his findings in science. He even made a clear distinction between thieves and killers. Physically, they look different. So he had different tiers or categories of criminal minds. So he could basically, based on his studies, he could tell if you're a killer, you would look this way. And if you're a thief, you look this way. So it's not about only criminal minds. He was kind of having different categories depending on, the kind of criminal you are. He even published a book where he claimed that people with tattoos are most likely to be criminals because they wanted and they enjoyed the pain of getting tattooed, which, I mean, that is mind-blowing. Honestly, it is mind-blowing. I think that's one of the most out there things that this guy claimed. I mean, okay, I can put up with the jaw, I can put up with it, but just telling that people are criminals just because they choose to have a tattoo. And by the way, I don't have any, and I'm not planning to get any tattoos. I'm not defending myself in any way, but it just blows my mind that because they had a tattoo, and he assumed. And here I'm assuming, because I don't know if he had any tattoo, but I'm assuming that he assumed that since it was painful, I don't know, maybe in that back then it was very, very painful compared to what it is today, but I just can't put two and two together in this case. So he also had a category for what he called insane criminals. I mean, he even put that category, I mean, it was pretty crazy, because he, in that category, the insane criminals, he put there the alcoholics, and he also put there the kleptomaniacs, among others. And it seems like at this point this guy was trying to, again, put them in different categories of criminal minds. But for this one in particular, apparently alcoholics and kleptomaniacs, they had no moral sense, and they were part of a criminaloids. I'm not sure how to say that, but basically, they commit crimes of opportunity for financial gain or impulsive crime of passion. So basically, if you were an alcoholic or a kleptomaniac, or if you fit in this category, you basically wouldn't kill per se, or you wouldn't plan, but you were more likely to commit a crime of passion, which is something that, kind of all of a sudden. And, or if you would get extra money. That is basically it. I mean, that's what he believed, and that people in this category would do. Eventually, these findings were discredited, but he was determined, so he continued to experiment with scientific measurements throughout his life. In 1895, he even created and used a device to record the changes in the body when people were telling a lie, which basically was the prototype for our modern day lie detector. So even though this guy, had a very strong theory that was discredited, he still continued to find something to help. So, I mean, at least he was trying to do something really good, and that, it kind of helped to get what we have today as a lie detector, that even though it's not allowed in court, it really helps in an investigation. This doctor also contributed with his findings. I feel like a lot of new developments were based on his findings, because later on, this police officer, Alphonse Bertillon, developed a system of detail. I mean, they would detail, and they have the measurements and everything to a criminal type, quote unquote criminal type. So maybe this guy was using a little bit of the Dr. Lombroso's theories and findings. Now, in the 1880s, the Paris Police Department took these measurements in everyone they arrested. They did it for prisoners as well and ex-convicts. But this surprisingly proved to be very useful for all the departments. So they later on incorporated also spoken portraits, or quote unquote spoken portraits, where a criminal is described by his features, and then they add that into their system. So I feel like even though it was a little bit out there, the criminal type that he was going for, it still helped to have all those description of not only people that they were getting arrested, but also the people that were in jail already, maybe to help in future investigations. Now, this police officer Bertillon also invented the standardized mugshot used universally today. So it's the full face, as if you've seen one, you know what I'm talking about. Is a full face, and then the profile view. So I feel like he probably used that as well to record the measurements and descriptions of the quote unquote spoken portrait back then. And he used these pictures to do that. And I mean, who would have known that today we're going to be still using the same style of pictures that, it was back in the 1880s. That's when he incorporated that. So his system was adopted in the rest of France as part in parts of Europe, but later was discredited. I mean, basically the one thing that we can tell that this guy left that we still use today is the mugshot pictures and idea. Finally, I thought that I should add this. Even Sir Arthur Doyle, he credited Bertillon as one of the inspirations for the character Sherlock Holmes, because basically this officer was not only coming up with all these things that they were recording and they were trying to keep a tab on and trying to help for future cases, but also, I mean, he was very into it, and he would find his way around. He would record things, and that was part of the character of Sherlock Holmes. So even, he was very invested in that, so much so that he was part of the inspiration of Sherlock Holmes. And if you love Sherlock Holmes as much as I do, then I think this guy, Bertillon, and Mugshot was great, but, being part of that inspiration, it's really cool. Now, another thing that this first doctor that we talk about today, and I'm going to add it here at the end because it's like a fun fact. I don't want to offend anybody here, but one of the things that Dr. Lombroso said is that left-handed people were suspect. He believed that they had a tendency, or that they would probably become a criminal in the future. I mean, think about having a 5-year-old kid and this guy telling you that he will more than likely be a criminal. And the crazy thing is not even that, because Dr. Lombroso was pretty out there, but I think that, what is crazier is that this was a theory that came from Roman times. So this is a very, very old theory. And some of the examples that Lombroso gave was Jack the Ripper, the Boston Strangler, Billy the Kid, John Wesley Hardin, and John Dillinger. So, according to his research, people that know that it's left-handed, where he didn't say that they were all criminals, but more than likely will become a criminal. I like to believe that there is not such a thing like a bad to the bone person. I think that we all, and again, we're gonna go through this to the different things. We're gonna go tomorrow. We're gonna go into the minds and how they could tell if you're a criminal by looking in your brain. But if we're gonna talk about what Lombroso discovered, and even later on Bertillon discovered, I mean, they were pretty cool things. They were scary for the time, and I'm sure people were terrified by these findings. And they were probably looking at pictures of everyone in their families and their neighbors and their teachers and bosses and stuff. But I'm also thinking about, and this was the 1800s, they probably didn't even have pictures of that. It's not like it was the modern day internet, I'm going to stalk you through Facebook kind of thing. But you know what I mean. People, it was bad for them to go through all this. But at the same time, I feel like every time we fail some kind of investigation, we always get something out of it. And we did get a few things good out of the Dr. Lombroso, and we did get quite a few things because of the investigation and the effort that the police officer Bertillon did in France. So yeah, we do learn quite a few things based on science, and that it still helps nowadays in the year 2018. So I feel like everything that happened in the past, as much as crazy, maybe you read about this and you were like, well, that's crazy. I wouldn't even, try to waste my time understanding why they thought of that. But I think it always takes you somewhere. And this information is stored in your brain. And it's funny how all of a sudden in a conversation or in a new theory that comes in the news or something, you can look back into what you know from the past and make up your own mind and not be used by media or whoever is trying to convince you to believe in what it is that they believe and that they're sharing with you. I personally believe that there is not such thing as bad to the bone. I think we all are born with 100 different endings. That with everyday decisions and how we are raised, the parents that we have, the situation where we are growing into, the neighborhood, the education that we're given, that it's kind of molding us into something. Can you become an evil person? Most definitely. You can have the most loving parents and become a crazy criminal. And you're going to have the most religious parents that took you to church every Sunday and you got baptized and you did the whole thing. And then all of a sudden you don't believe in God anymore and you become part of a cult or something. I mean, I'm not saying that. Yeah, I mean, what happens to you while you're young, it determines a lot. But I do know a lot of people that grew up in a horrible situation. Parents, addicts, abuse. My goodness, there's so many things that they went through and they became the best version of themselves. I can think of one right now, one of my classmates in elementary school. She had the worst life. She's a very successful lawyer today with a beautiful family. She's not, the career-driven kind of person that's working all day. She believes that she needs time with her family and her kids need her and everything, but do you know what I mean? I mean, she had the most horrible life. You think about the most horrible life, and she had it. And I'm not here to tell you her story, but you know what I mean? It's crazy to see how even circumstances sometimes are not going to determine the kind of person you become. Yeah, more than likely you're going to go through the easy road, but not necessarily 100% of the time. So in the back of my mind, just to close this podcast episode, I do believe there is something scientific, something chemically unbalanced, something that I want to believe that it's something that either develops in you and it's triggered by a situation that you're going through, maybe depression, different circumstances, maybe having problems with your husband or wife or children's or, whatever the case may be. But, I don't know. Something tells me that there is something physically wrong with people that do these things. Because if you're having a fight with your husband or with your wife and, you're mad, there's a lot of things, but, it doesn't really cross your mind to grab a gun and shoot them. Not for most people. Okay, what happened to those people? The ones that do think that, they do take action, the ones that do that. What's the difference? And I hope that with all this research that I've been doing, it's just going to help us understand a little bit more. And even though we know we're not going to find the answer that we're looking for. Okay, there is. It's a chemical called blah, blah, blah that it really, triggers criminals or whatever. We're not going to find it here. But we're going to understand a lot more, a heck of a lot more on how the brain works and how, this is something that scientists are looking for today. They want the answer. They just need to understand how their brain works for those people and what the differences are between, them and quote unquote what they used to call in the 1800 normal people, which there's not a big definition on that one either. I hope you join me tomorrow. We're going to go through the brain, which is one of my favorite things. So I'm going to explain to you a few of the theories that we had back then, some of the things that we're doing right now. So join me tomorrow for the brain part of this investigation. Thank you so much again for your support and for listening to this podcast. And I will come back tomorrow. Bye, guys.